Hi there, Michael here. On this channel, I mainly focus on immersive audio production in 3D audio formats such as Dolby Atmos or Ambisonics. And because of that, I use a lot of multi-channel plugins in a variety of digital audio workstations. But unfortunately, multi-channel plugins do not always play nice with your DAW. Sometimes they misbehave and refuse to work in the way they were intended. So one of the most frequently asked questions I get on this channel is, what do you do if your multi-channel plugin is not doing what it is supposed to do? How do you handle a situation where your DAW refuses to recognize your multi-channel plugin as being multi-channel and insists on using it in stereo only? Or what do you do if your DAW assigns the channels out of the multi-channel plugin in the wrong order, and what was supposed to come out of your front speakers is suddenly behind you? Fortunately, in the vast majority of cases, there is a relatively simple fix that involves wrapping the misbehaving multi-channel plugin into a modular multi-channel plugin host that serves as a multi-channel wrapper plugin. And this is what we will be doing today. We will look at the situation in Studio One where the DAW identifies a multi-channel plugin incorrectly, and we will use a wrapper plugin to fix that problem. Let's get started. Very quick disclaimer, this is not a sponsored video. I purchased the wrapper plugin I'm going to use today myself. I actually purchased the plugin before I even started to create weekly YouTube videos. Having said that, it is always a good idea to check everything you see on YouTube yourself. Always try before you buy. The plugin that I'm going to use today is called Cushview Element. It is available in an open source version from GitHub, where you can simply download and install it. And if you like it, you can then purchase an update key that gives you access to automatic updates. By purchasing a key, you also support the developer, which is always appreciated. I'm going to leave corresponding links in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's jump into Studio One. What I have here is a very simple Studio One session consisting of one track, and that track is a track that I actually have used in previous videos. Let's just have a brief listen what we have here. Now the way I've set this up here is that this track is routed into a 9.1.6 bus, and this 9.1.6 bus is then routed into the bed of a Dolby Atmos project, or a Dolby Atmos session, and it arrives here in the Dolby Atmos renderer in the bed channels. And what I want to do is I want to upmix that stereo track into 9.1.6. Now, a lot of people usually get upset with me if I'm upmixing a stereo track into Dolby Atmos. And for those of you who kind of are in that group, I just wanted to point out that this is primarily for demonstration purposes. And there might be actually situations where you want to do that. For example, if you're working on a movie and you want to have an audio track that is sort of immersive, but at the same time also still need to place the voices and the vocals. So this might very well be a situation you find yourself in. But once again, this is primarily for demonstration purposes. And the way I'm going to do the upmixing is with a plugin that I've actually reviewed in a previous video, which is called Inu, the Immersive Nulling Upmixer. The nice thing about this plugin is that it allows you to upmix the stereo track into 9.1.6 in such a way that the fold down nulls, meaning that you're not losing any of the quality of the original stereo. You essentially upmixing and keeping the entire sonic qualities intact. And the problem with that particular plugin is that it does not really play nice with Studio One. So let's have a look on how we can resolve that situation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to load in that plugin. Now you cannot load in the plugin directly. The plugin is actually a plug data patch. So what we need to do is we need to load the plug data plugin. And I can choose either one of them. Let me just kind of select the audio unit. And here we have the Inu patch. And this is now Inu. And once again, if you have never watched my video about Inu, I highly recommend watching that. This is a really, really nice plugin that is very capable of upmixing stereo to 9.1.6. And best of all, it was created by one of our own Discord members, Sam Hawking, actually the co-host of the Spatial Audio Monthly podcast. And if you want to chat with Sam, you can actually do so by joining our Discord server. Once again, that link is in the description below. So in order to better see what is actually happening, let me just add a level meter here. Level meter. Here we are. And I'm going to pin that so that we have it visible all the time. And then let's open up our plug data patch and let's play the audio again. And as you can see, even though Eno correctly gets the stereo and converts everything into 9.1.6, only 2 channels actually reach the level meter. And the reason for that is that the plugin, our plug data plugin actually is incorrectly identified as a stereo plugin. So we can actually see that here, that we only Studio One only sees it as a stereo plugin, and unfortunately, there isn't really a way to change that. So at that point, we are technically stuck. Plug data loads nicely. Eno essentially loads nicely. Eno converts everything very, very kind of nicely into 9.1.6, but unfortunately, Studio One doesn't take in all the 16 channels. It only takes in 2, and that is an issue. Now, the way we're going to solve this problem is by loading plug data not directly into Studio One, but instead loading it into a separate plugin host, a multi-channel plugin host. And that multi-channel plugin host will hopefully be able to establish the communication between Studio One and plug data. We will see. So let me first delete that plug data plugin here. We don't need that anymore, and I'm going to remove that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load in my plugin host, and the plugin host that I'm going to load in is called Element from Kushview. Element. And when you load that in, be aware that some plugin versions might work where others might not work. So you need to simply test it out. And if you follow my steps and you find that it doesn't work out completely, just try it with a different version. Now, in my particular case, with Studio One and being on a Mac, it actually turns out that the VST3 version has some hiccups. It doesn't really work completely as intended. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the audio unit version instead. And here we have Element. Now, let me just kind of move that in front of the level meter because we actually want to meter what's coming out of plug data and not the other way around. And the first thing that we see is that this plugin is actually being recognized as a multi-channel plugin. So Studio One correctly identified that sitting on a 9.1.6 track. So that's already good. So Studio One understands that this is a multi-channel plugin. Now, the next thing that we need to do is, and I'm not going to go into details about how Element actually works. If you want me to do that, let me know. I can do a video about it, but it's actually relatively straightforward, and there's a very good documentation on the Kushview website. But we also need to tell Kushview that we are actually expecting to work with multi-channel. So currently in the standard configuration, it assumes that we're working with the first 2 channels, and we actually want to work with all 16 of them. So let me just add additional input channels here until we reach 16, and then the same thing for the output channels. And that essentially means that now Kushview is set up to work with multi-channel with all 16 channels. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to load in plug data into Element. And there is one thing which is really nice about Element. If you've ever worked with these types of plugin hosts, you know that they tend to also scan all your plugins. And if you have a lot of plugins, then that scanning can, first of all, take a lot of time, and it can also be relatively unstable. There are certain plugin hosts which tend to crash when they are scanning their plugins. And the nice thing about Kushview Element is that it only scans the plugin if you actually need it. So it's not going to scan everything by default. What you can do is if you right-click here, you should actually, here we are. If you right-click here, you should actually see here the unverified section. These are all the plugins that you have not used yet and that have not been scanned by Element. And then you can simply go into that section. It's a little bit kind of unwieldy and a little bit difficult to see, but this is essentially all the plugins that I have not used within Element and that Element has not yet scanned, but it doesn't scan those by default. Now, in my particular case, I've already scanned plug data. So here's plug data. Now, when you scan this plugin, same thing as with Element, also make sure that you test every single version of that plugin. Plug data comes in different versions, and it turns out that in this particular case, the VST3 version actually worked. So once again, you need to test the different versions that you have and then use the one that actually works for you. In this particular case, it was the VST3 version. So let me load that in. And here we have plug data. Let me just open that up by double clicking here. And we need to kind of open up the patch. And so here we have that patch. And then we need to establish the connections, and this can be take a little bit of time. Now, in terms of the input, we actually need only the first two, and then let's connect the 16 output sections. And I'm not quite sure if I should tell a joke at that point. It takes a little bit until we have everything. Unfortunately, this is not possible. At least I didn't find yet a way to do all 16 at once, but that's fine. Let's just kind of do a couple of connections more. And here we have the last one. And then let's see if everything works as intended. If things work as intended, we should now see all 16 channels coming through in the level meter. So let's play the audio. And yes, indeed, it is the case. So these now are coming in, and that essentially means that I can now work with Eno in the way I would always work with Eno if Studio One would recognize that as a regular multi-channel plugin. And that actually works really, really, really nice. Now, at this point, it is important to test a couple of things. The first one that we need to check is to make sure that the channels are actually coming in at the correct order. We currently have plug data within Element and the Element within Studio One, and it is possible that the way the channels are routed from plug data into Element into Studio One might actually screw up the order, so we need to check everything. Now, within Eno, we have actually the possibility to simply click on this button here, and then we will see if everything comes in the way it's supposed to come in. And let me just kind of go through these one by one. So if you click here on the left one, it's coming in the left channel, right channel, center channel, LFE, and then left surround. And we already see here we have an issue. The left surround actually reaches Studio One as the left right surround, or the left rear surround, sorry for that. Now, since we're in Studio One, there are actually two ways in how we can rearrange the channels so that they match the way Studio One expects them to come in. And the first one is to do that in Studio One itself. Studio One has this nice ability here to simply rearrange the channel order, so we can simply kind of grab those and move those around in order to make sure that everything matches the way it's supposed to come in. Or we can also change the way these kind of channels here are connected. So we would have to go through each one of them and make sure that whatever is kind of shown here in plug data also reaches whatever Studio One expects. And then we would simply save everything into a preset so that we don't have to do that all the time whenever we load that plugin in. And we are set and ready to go. Now, one final thing, because I already know that many of you are going to ask that question. Now that I have plug data hosted within a plugin that is hosted within Studio One, how do I do automation? How do I automate the parameters of Eno? And the answer to that is it's actually relatively simple, because Element allows you to forward the parameters for automation. And in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to go here into the editor. Well, first of all, we need to select the plugin where we want to do automation. So in my particular case, that is plug data. And then we need to go here into the editor. So let's double click that. And here you see all the individual parameters, and you can kind of link them with these macros here. So if I'm right clicking here, I can say I want, for example, the direct push be mapped onto that first parameter. And now that first parameter in Element links with the direct push in Eno, and that can be automated in exactly the way you would normally automate any parameter in a plugin. And that's really everything you need to know in order to be able to automate those parameters in kind of Studio One. And then there's one very last thing that I wanted to point out, because Element obviously is not the only plugin that can do that. It is free because it is open source, so it's actually a good choice. But many of you might actually have something like Bloke Bidule. So the question is, can you do that with Bloke Bidule as well? And the answer is obviously yes. So the Element is not the only plugin that can do that. The only problem that I ran into by using Bloke Bidule is that it is incredibly unstable, especially on a Mac. So if I'm loading Bidule, for example, here, and I'm going to leave a link to Bidule in the description below. So let me just load the VST3 version of Bidule. And if I essentially do anything here, it crashes. so So I'm not quite sure why. I tried to make a bug report, but I might actually do that. Maybe somebody from Plogue watches this, but Plogue Bidule has become incredibly unstable on a Mac. It crashes pretty much any digital audio workstation on a Mac. It's not only Studio One. It also crashes Cubase. It even crashes Reaper, which is a first for me. It crashes Reaper not when you load in the plugin or when you're working with the plugin, but and when you exit Reaper, it actually kind of crashes, which is unique. So my recommendation is to go with Element. First of all, free. Second, it's actually relatively stable. Just make sure that you test everything and that you use a combination of plugin types that works for you. In my particular case, I needed to use the audio unit version of Element. And inside Element, I needed to use the VST3 version of Plug Data, and that worked perfectly. And, you actually only need one solution. You don't need kind of every combination to work. If you have one combination that works, it's already fine. Well, that's everything for today. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section or join our free Discord server. The invite link is in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all things Dolby Atmos and immersive audio. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.